Death is obviously pretty inevitable, and that's probably a big reason as to why so much medium focuses on it, film, TV, and as I usually talk about, music. There's a fair few albums that I could list off: Carrie Low, Stage 4, Black Star. The list kind of just goes on and on, but today I want to spend a good wee while talking about 5 songs that I deem pretty important when it comes to the conversation about death in this lovely audio form. And as always, I would love you guys to let me know what you kind of think are the essential songs to exploring it. But I've got 5 here that I think do a fairly good job looking into death in various ways, not just somebody dying, just something. Each one has a unique thing to take away from it. And we'll start off with my first choice, because you know what, us humans, we love to think about stuff that we don't really know about, or we don't really know about until it happens. It's just how we are as a curious kind of wee species. And I think No Name did a pretty good job exploring that in her last album with the song I think something I kind of admire about Don't Forget About Me is the fact that No Name manages to kind of show off an understanding of life, something that you maybe would expect from somebody like twice her age, who just manages to sort of like capture these really like horrible life events in a way that I think no one else really could. Her wordplay and her wit, which might not be the right word to use for that, because you usually think in like comedic wit, but when you think of lines where she's talking about feeling fishy, finding chemo, and obviously kind of other lines where she's saying like she's asking D'Angelo for help in that, I feel this is just stuff that if any other rapper was to kind of list these off, I don't know if it comes down to the delivery or her attitude or her personality, but it just makes these lines all more impactful. Her watching other people kind of waste away, watching herself waste away, just these 2 different versions of death, kind of somebody causing this with their own sort of like toxic actions, or just sort of feeling totally helpless. Your kind of autonomy in these kind of situations, I guess, is like the right word to use. And I think that's a big part of this song, is just sort of how at a certain point when you die, you just have no kind of choice over what's going to happen to you, and when you actually pass, you have zero choice of how people remember you. Will that be in the sense that No Name has no choice over how people are going to remember her, even if people do remember her, which is a big thing. But the bit that's obviously kind of have hit me the most when thinking about this song is definitely how her family will look back on her. Stuff like how if they'll remember her for the person that she thinks she is. Also, if they'll even remember her at all, they'll obviously pass before she does, if it goes the usual cycle. And maybe she'll watch a similar sort of action where she's kind of like been killing herself with drink. In a similar way, her family members may just kind of like fade away, and kind of, I guess maybe not a direct comparison, but kind of like there's a few bits kind of allude to sort of like dementia, which is more death of the mind as opposed to death of the body, which can be just as kind of traumatic and haunting. And I just think this was an incredibly mature cut. It goes without saying, the kind of watching death happen is just not nice at all. But maybe a more harrowing example is maybe reflecting on your life as it's about to be taken away from you. And that's what our next example is going to be, that being a song by Mitski called maybe one to avoid if you don't like planes. But and beauty is maybe going to be a word that I use that might feel a bit odd for some people, but there's something a little kind of freeing about this song that I think Mitski's directly trying to touch upon, and that comes down to this kind of really kind of like grim event where she is on a plane and she just gets told, "Yep, there's too much turbulence. We're going down." And obviously, the star of this song's title is obviously alluding to this just plane just falling down and crashing, which is obviously kind of like a huge fear for a lot of people. But through all this kind of like hecticness and that, Mitski is kind of reflecting her life, kind of realising that maybe she's kind of just bought into these falsehoods that have maybe just given her a warped perception of life. How a really great example in this song is when she's talking about the Liberty Bell, how it's a replica, and the Liberty Bell is obviously meant to be this whole kind of like symbol of courage, but as soon as it became sort of like kind of like started to wear away a bit, like the sign of like kind of like keep on persevering, that like it's almost like, yeah, she's been lied to in a lot of ways. I found that a really kind of like great kind of comparison. It just only goes to kind of like attest to how Mitski carefully chooses her words. And in another way, she kind of like is sort of playful with this concept. There's like this like really thin layer of distortion lying at the bottom of this song, quite in the same way that the people on this plane are maybe going to be lying at the bottom of the ocean, lying at the bottom of wherever they end up crashing into. And the way that she kind of holds on certain lines, her delivery, where she's saying like she's going to be alive, which should be a very hopeful line, but I feel like at this point in the crash, she's just thinking to herself that maybe it's for the best. Maybe the way that people remember me is going to be a way that I'd want to be remembered, and maybe just how she's been treated in a lot of ways makes her think, you know what, I'm glad I've had this sort of kind of confirmation. And I think this is an important song about death, not because I think that people have to go through a plane crash to come to this conclusion, but I think it comes to the fact that really kind of hard moments in your life can bring a great deal of just kind of serenity and peace and kind of knowledge. And obviously that's not something anyone should have to go through just to experience it, but it's just to kind of show that it's something that can be sort of comforting in a way, that you're going to come out of it a different person and hopefully a better person. Personally, I know when it's came to the past and the people in my life, it's definitely helped a lot to know that I've at least been able to take away something from it, or at least been able to feel closer to other people in that, which is something that I greatly admire about this song in particular. But these two examples that I've given so far have been songs where it's more the thought of death, more the thought of your own death. But in life, when you experience death, it's going to be experiencing the death of other people. And this next song is definitely kind of the worst case scenario, an absolute nightmare situation. That being a song by The Hotelier titled If the topic of suicide or depression is particularly triggering to you, then I would suggest that you skip this part of the video. I'll put a timecode on screen. I'll see you when we talk about the next song. But I couldn't possibly skip the analysis of this track, because it is pretty much kind of the jewel in The Hotelier's crown album, that being Home Like No Place Is There, Your Deep Rest. This is a song that already tackles a pretty horrible scenario to be in, that being kind of like attending the funeral of somebody close to you. But the kind of the reoccurring feeling in this song is kind of regret and kind of blaming yourself. And this is just kind of like a nightmare scenario, especially just due to the fact that in your life there are going to be people close to you that are suffering from mental health. And I hope that no one watching this is ever going to have to like suffer kind of like watching or hearing about somebody that they were close to passing away by their own hands. But that's certainly what happens in this song, and there's definitely just kind of like specific moments that just stand out to me as just utterly heart-wrenching, kind of like they just kind of like put a lump in your throat, especially when it comes to him seeing the body, saying how he didn't recognise their shell, which like just using that word shell, just that one word like represents so much. And that's again, there's a sense of just care taken here, that I find just beautiful. Beautiful is just the way I'd put it, but it's also harrowing and hopefully there's a word that can kind of capture both of those feelings. But near the end of the song, it kind of comes out that the narrator watched this person pass away, and that's why they feel so much kind of regret and they blame themselves because, as the narrator puts it, they watched them set their spirit free, which again, just the word in there is just it just takes such like a kind of like a grim kind of place to be in, a grim position to be in, and that's the thing that this person just kind of keeps going. Oh, I should have listened more, like blaming themselves, and maybe they could have helped. But in a similar way, when you watch somebody pass away, you just kind of think to yourself like all the stuff you could have done, just kind of like all the what ifs. And when it comes to death, sometimes, most of the time, there's nothing that you could have done. But this is like the nightmare scenario where there was some sort of kind of like control you could have had, that maybe you could have done something else, and that just disturbs me. I'm a very anxious person, and kind of the way that this song goes about just really plays in to that fear, and that's why I feel like it is very important. Both because it could have tied into the mental health episode I did very easily, but I do think there's just so much to be taken away from this song, just from like a more grander perspective. And sadly, the kind of like the grim descriptions of that aren't going to come to an end when we talk about this next song. How fitting for us to talk about this band in this kind of video. My Chemical Romance kind of just, they go hand in hand with death, like a pop punk band and misogyny. It's just sort of integral to their image and their sound. When they started off, I don't think they did too well, but by the time that 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge came about, they just knew what they're doing. That's a very kind of like a good conceptual death album. It could have joined the list of albums that I talked about at the start of this video, and to be fair, Black Parade could as well. It's following the journey of the patient, and for this song, Cancer, this is where it's just at its most blunt, its most direct. This is the grisly fate that this person is dealing with. And cancer is obviously a metaphor just for like slowly withering away, but in this song in particular, it is just kind of an upfront, this person, the patient, is dying of cancer. And not only is it horrible because they're watching themselves wither away, saying how the chemo is making them soggy, how their hair's all falling off. It's just, it's chilling. But the thing that can even add to that even more is just how his loved ones are surrounding him, and how he doesn't even want to show them that intimacy and that love because he just knows it's going to be getting taken away from him. And I think the way that Gerard Way approached this was just incredibly respectful, because it could have been so easy to kind of like, I know a fair few kind of movies and that sort of approach cancer and other sort of like terminal illnesses in a way that is sort of just infanticize them and just romanticize them. And I feel the way they approached this was just incredibly respectful, incredibly well intentioned, without kind of like buttering up all the superfluous kind of just kind of glitter and stuff that could have been kind of put on it, because it is a glam rock song. It's a genre that's all about just kind of amplifying the goofy and cool parts to just kind of just be so raw and talk about it in such a way I just find astounding. I know My Chemical Romance for a lot of people were maybe a bit cheesy, a bit kind of maybe even dated to some people, but this song, man, is just incredibly powerful, and one that even if you've never met somebody that's kind of passed from cancer or suffered from it, I think especially can just sort of be just the image of it and just thinking about the concept of fading away while your loved ones surround you and never having that moment is just difficult to even comprehend. But that being said, this last song that we're going to talk about, I think can show that in the misery of things there can be beauty, and that beauty can help us digest the situation, can help us come to terms with it. And that's how we're going to get on to this really famous but well deserving of the love it gets song from Radiohead. Pyramid Song, to just put it lightly, is a gorgeous, eerie, a comforting song in a lot of ways. It is just poetry as far as I'm concerned. I feel like this was an important song in Radiohead's career because it kind of showed a poeticism to the band that maybe a lot of people just kind of like brushed over and didn't think about. Obviously, in the position we are in just now, 2019, it's well known how the band manages to kind of word themselves. But I think it kind of says a lot that I said a lot about the importance of this song and what it means to people. The fact that folk analyse it to the point where they argue that the song itself is comprised of pyramid shapes. When you look at the rhythms and the quavers and all that, they think you can actually, that you could make a pyramid out of it. I think that kind of shows a great deal of care to a song, because why would you analyse it to that extent? But I think there's one person who can talk about this song better than I possibly could on a lyrical level, and that's Thom Yorke himself.
And it was just lots of stuff about Hawkins.
Stephen Hawkins.
You know, he talks about time and the idea that time is completely cyclical. Just is going. It's always doing this. It's just it's a factor like gravity, and it just sort of it's something that I found in like Buddhism and stuff as well, and that's what Pyramid Song is about. Pyramid Song is about the fact that everything is going in circles. It's not a desperate attempt to avoid the death. It's not a desperate attempt to avoid life passing you by, getting old, all that sort of stuff. It's like, that's all just bollocks.
I think that's what makes the song so powerful in a lot of ways. It's just kind of like how it is a rather endearing message. It's kind of wrapped in some aptly dark and maybe even kind of like haunting clothing, but to me, I think that the kind of the overall point that it's trying to hit home is just really, it's like a companion piece. I've never listened to this song in kind of like the context of losing somebody, but when it gets to the end of the song and they're talking about like taking a little rowboat to heaven and whatnot, I do think there's something to be taken away from the song where it's kind of like it feels like kind of like a warm embrace that doesn't gloss over how, again, haunting and depressing and just miserable the scenario can be, but it doesn't say that there's not some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. I could put it at that. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you're all doing well, and yeah, I'll speak to you guys very soon. As always, stay safe and stay hydrated.